And everyone, thank you so much for joining. We're going to get started here in the next minute or so, but we're going to give folks a chance to have the opportunity to introduce yourselves in the chat and to join. So if you could let us know wherever you're watching from, where in the world you are, we will get started here soon. Thank you again so much for joining. We'll get started in the next minute. Oh, hi, Emily from Bend, Oregon. Welcome, welcome. Right. Hey, Scott, welcome. From Dallas, Oregon. All the way from Toronto, Ontario. Wonderful. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning from Denver, Colorado. Great representation all over. Well, welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar, our first of two webinars this week. We have Restorative Justice Up Close, first-person accounts of an approach that works, with the editor of this new work, Restorative Justice Up Close, Sally Wolf, and two authors from the work, Dr. Sandra Pavelka and Don Carney. If you don't know me, I'm Des Moines Ted Wesley. I am the Associate Director of the Zaire Institute, which is a program of Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peace Building. And I'm so glad that you are able to join us today. We are going to have a great conversation with Sally, Dr. Pavelka, and Dawn today. There will be some time for Q&A. So please, as you're listening, if you have the book and you have some burning questions, please make sure you get those in the chat, and we will do our best to get those answered. And then right at the end, I'll have a few announcements to share with you. Okay. So without further ado, and yes, thank you for all of you who are watching, who are introducing yourself. Thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists. First up, we have Sally Swarthout Wolf, who has more than 20 years of experience as a restorative justice practitioner, trainer, speaker, and leader. She is the former director of Ford County Probation and Court Services, where she first encountered the power of restorative justice to interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline for young people. Wolf is also the co-founder of the Illinois Balanced and Restorative Justice Project. She lives with her husband, Don, in Paxton, Illinois. Welcome, Sally. Thank you so much for being here. Next up, we have Dr. Sandra Pavelka, who is professor and founding director of the Institute for Youth and Justice Studies at Florida Gulf Coast University. She previously served as project administrator for the Balanced and Restorative Justice Project, funded by the U.S. Department of Justice, and associate director of the Center for the Study of Youth Policy at the Shepherd Broad Law Center, Nova Southeastern University. She serves on the advisory committee for the U.S. Congressional Crime Survivors and Justice Caucus, Law and Policy Committee, former chair for the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, and is a member of the European Forum on Restorative Justice Working Group on Law. She is a frequent speaker, and her book, Restorative Justice in Legal Systems, Education, and Community, Reflections on What Works, Where We Can Grow, and What's Next, co-edited with Ann Seymour, has received national recognition. She has a wealth of experience and knowledge, and we are so grateful for having her here. Welcome, Dr. Pavelka.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And last but certainly not least, we have Don Carney, who has worked in the fields of juvenile and social justice and at the forefront of disrupting the school to prison pipeline for over 50 years. He operated group homes and educational services for adjudicated youth and was the founding director of the Social Justice Center of Marin. He is the founder and executive director of Youth Transforming Justice, a youth-led social justice movement that is transforming punitive school, discipline, and juvenile justice systems into restorative, trauma-informed, peer-driven solutions. To support youth referred to the program, Don developed the substance safety skills harm reduction training. The training components provide a pragmatic approach for parents dealing with a substance experimenting child and prepares teens with the skills to be each other's first responders. Don co-chairs Marin's Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Commission. He's a California Association of Youth Courts Trustees and a member of the California Office of Youth and Community Restoration Restorative Justice Advocacy Committee. So again, a wealth of knowledge with Don. Thank you so much for being here. All right. So let's jump right in. I have a few questions for each of you. And again, after that, after our initial conversation, I'll turn to the audience for any questions that they may have. But this first question I really have for each of you. So maybe we'll start with Sally, and then Dr. Pavelka, and then Dawn. Just curious about your restorative justice journey. What drew you to restorative justice? Where did you first hear about it? And why were you so connected to restorative justice? And again, I'll start with you, Sally. Sally, can you hear me?
You know, Devontae, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I cannot hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Maybe she'll check the private chat. While we're working out the technical difficulties with Sally, maybe you could get us started, Dr. Pavelka.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today and us. So let's go back in time to the 1990s, probably a really good decade. And I was actually working with he's now passed, but Judge Frank Orlando. I was project administrator of the Florida Detention Alternative Initiative. We were also working on the National Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative funded by NACC. And I was working on my PhD at the time. I met this professor by the name of Dr. Gordon Bazemore. Many of us remember him, and many on the line probably know him as well or had heard of him. And Gordon had done some of our evaluation work with the Casey Foundation, with some of the sites we worked with. And I started hearing about this term called restorative justice. And I was very curious. He told me more about it. And at first I wasn't quite, it hadn't really resonated with me because when you talk about the different elements of restorative justice and principles, until you really kind of have this aha moment, it may not, kind of resonate. So long story to kind of fast forward, he needed a project administrator, and we talked more about, my work, and he really wanted me to come on board to run what was called the Balance and Restorative Justice Project as a project administrator. We were funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention. And I met individuals like John Braithwaite and Denny Maloney and Kate Pranis. And it just all, kind of came to me like, wow, this is incredible work. These people are doing incredible work. We were, we were working in states. He, of course, hired me We ended up working in states all across the country. And I actually did my dissertation on a national assessment of policy and law. We knew we were working in the states and actually Illinois, and that's where I met Sally back in the 1990s, late 1990s. We knew we were doing this great work, but we needed to kind of assess it. And so it just was life altering. It was this aha moment that really changed my life. My life wouldn't have been the same without meeting Dr. Bazemore and the incredible contribution he had. And it's now become my life's work. So it was really kind of transformational process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And I think it's probably a pretty unique introduction to restorative justice. So thank you for sharing that background.
Thank you.
How about you, Dawn? What was your first introduction to RJ, and what really connected you?
Well, mine's pretty organic. I ran group homes for wards of the court in the mid-70s to the mid-80s. And we were constantly repairing harm and repairing relationships because of the high trauma of the young people we were working with. And then I got a position providing services to schools in California that address the needs of kids who are on probation. And zero tolerance was filling those schools during that period of time. And Marin County is a fairly small county, about 260,000. So we were mixing middle school kids with high school kids in that criminogenic environment. And it just was not a good deal. Yeah. So I was on a juvenile justice commission at that time, and we started looking around for a way to divert the middle schoolers from the county school. And we found something called youth courts. So the district attorney and a public defender locally taught about 40 kids how to play law and order. And we had our first case. And from the kids' point of view, they thought it went well. I thought it was a disaster. I had a young person prosecute a traumatized kid on the stand. And the defense attorney, another young kid, felt like a failure. And I sat down with him and I said, listen, what we have right now is we're replicating what's wrong with the judicial system. It's a win-lose system. It doesn't heal. And I'll bet we can find a way to approach this as a win-win system. So pretty quickly, we found restorative practices. Shortly thereafter, we found trauma-informed care, and we changed up the youth court world in my neighborhood and left all the judicial language behind. We don't sentence kids. We co-develop a restorative plan with a young person. So we've changed that world a bit. My colleagues in the State Association of Youth Courts, some of them are still very attached to the legal framework, and I've been successful in weaning them away from that, taking a look at youth development science, taking a look at what we've learned in the past 30 or 40 years, best practices. So I'm happy to say that a lot of the youth courts in California are shifting to a restorative trauma-informed model.
That's good.
That's beautiful. Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. And I may have some questions later about what it takes to sort of shepherd people through that shift in mindset. But yeah, well, that's a really interesting notion. Sally, you're back with us. Turning it to you, what drew you to restorative justice? What was your introduction? Oh. Okay, 1 second.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. For some reason, I haven't been able to hear, but I could hear Dawn. And so anyway, it looked as if you stopped talking, so I will assume that it's my turn to say that probation was a second career for me. And I became the director of court services, probation and court services in our small rural community. And I had a lot to learn because I just didn't really know a lot about what the justice system was. So I studied a lot, and I went to conferences a lot so I could learn more about what I was supposed to be doing. And I went to a conference that was a National Criminal Justice Conference, and they were talking about barge. And so I was really interested in what barge was. And I discovered that it was really geared for young people, and it was holding people accountable for the harm that they had caused, and not the law or the school rule that they had broken. And it was important for them to make amends, and that also that they needed training. You know, they needed to learn competencies instead of being punished for something they did wrong. They needed to, a lot of times, just learn what the right way of doing things was. And so I really was, I got hooked on it pretty fast. I was really interested in the idea of being, of having victims and having victims be a part of what we were doing. And so we did that, and we started doing it in our community. I went to training at the National Institute of Corrections first, and then to the Barge Project that was at Florida Atlantic University. And we also took some training from the what became later to be the International Institute of Restorative Practices. And we started doing it in our rural county. And so that's really how I got involved with it. We decided that there were other people. We thought there might be other people in Illinois who were starting to do it, but we reached out to them, and we held a summit in Illinois for what is restorative justice, and we brought all the folks in that we knew from around, the country, Mark Carey and Kay Pranis and Dee Bell and anyway, can't think of all of them, but we brought them all in, and it was really very successful. And so that's how we really got started.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sally. Sally, you may still not be able to hear, but Dawn, if you could tell Sally to look in the private chat.
So I really apologize that I cannot hear.
Sally, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, look in the private chat.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question that I'm teeing up for Sally is ideas for the book.
That's a big help. Thank you. The idea of the book came from when we eventually in Illinois, we had a statewide initiative on restorative justice, and that turned into a 501c3. And I left probation, and I was just doing trainings and program development and things like that. And when I was training, I remember one time, one of my first trainings, we had the chairs all set up in a circle, and Kay Pranis always said that I should have a box of Kleenex underneath my chair because I was going to need it. And a couple of guys came in and said, "Oh, good grief, are we going to have to cry? When do we sing Kumbaya?" And frequently, for trainings, people that didn't know about it, they'd always wonder if we were going to have to sing Kumbaya and what is this stuff anyway? And I always found that when I talked about what it was and what the statistics were and how much better it was, sometimes it went in one ear and out the other. And other times they sort of got it. And they got it because I was telling stories. And it seems like a story is so much better than a bunch of statistics. And so I started saying right away that, we need more stories. The challenge of more stories is that, especially for young people, they're protected, and you can't go around saying, "Oh, we had this great conference the other night, and this is what happened." And so you have to get a lot of permissions. But I did find it was important that whenever I could to get permissions so that I could share those stories. And I started collecting them. And so I had collected them from friends, colleagues from around the country that I knew that had stories. And I'd kind of run up against a wall because I was running out of people that I knew. And I was so busy to put it all together. And then I retired in 2015. And so when I retired, I had time to do it then. I wasn't practicing anymore. So then I really was able to reach out and get more names of people who would have stories, and we were looking for stories that were really wide ranged, that included a lot of different situations, so that they weren't all shoplifting cases for 12-year-olds. And that's one of the reasons why I like Sandra's and Don's so much, because hers was from a school and his was a totally different, and such a serious offense. And the difference of what could have happened, with that story that Don tells could have been just horrible for everybody, the way that the justice system would have handled it, I think, yeah, so that's how I got involved, and how we were looking for stories. We also found some stories that really we couldn't use because it would tell a book. It takes a book to tell those stories. And so there's a couple of people I have had to say, no, I'm sorry, we can't use this. But if you ever want to, I think you ought to write a book about this, or it takes a lot more than what just these stories can do for you.
Definitely. So. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, Sally mentions that the stories in the book sort of range. And so for those of you who have it or who don't, it's broken up into 4 parts. Part 1, restorative practices in schools. Part 2, youthful offending. Part 3, felony and other cases of serious harm. And then Part 4, community harms. So really a range of stories and experiences included. And like Sally mentioned, Dr. Pavelka and Dawn, your stories are sort of, are in different sections of the book. And so I'm curious to you, or for you both, could you tell us a little bit about your story and why you chose to include that story in the book? And what do you think, how do you think your contribution really exemplifies an important aspect of restorative justice process and practice? And what do you think that aspect is? And we can start with Dr. Pavelka and Dawn. Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because I've worked in the field of restorative justice, gosh, for over 30 years now, and hard to believe, but we've also seen it evolve. So, that there's the growth and the evolution of restorative justice, and looking at kind of my role is I've been a researcher, obviously professor, teacher, trainer, consultant, had so many roles along the way, and really brought that to the table. But for me and my story in the book, I looked at kind of the continuum. And again, I've had so many different experiences in facilitating circles and accountability boards and trainings that I really wanted to see where I felt the greatest impact was, and sharing my story. So with that, thinking about the continuum. So we think about prevention, intervention, the diversion aspect of restorative justice practices, programs in the court system, through within the court system itself, within the correctional and juvenile commitment programs, and then also in aftercare, and also in the community, because there are circles and different applications within the community that are not justice based. So me personally, I think that our greatest probably inspiration and impact that we can have is on the prevention intervention side, because if we get restorative justice at that early end, or at least restorative practices, and teach these, little kids to respect one another and listen to one another, and understand wrongdoing, and why someone hurt people, why they're hurting others, and try to get to that kind of base and that root of that issue. In the long run, we're going to help so many people, right, and so many lives. And so I chose a story that was based on a circle that I was doing some training and facilitating circles within several school districts, actually, but one in particular where the mom was a cleaning lady, and they lived on kind of a west side of the county, and she was a cleaning lady on the east side near the beach. So she would leave very early in the morning and have to leave her kids, her 3 daughters, to kind of fend for themselves. And the oldest, of course, became kind of the mother figure and had to really, take care of the others. And while in doing that, trying to, get them to school and get their kind of lives in order and watch them as a parental figure, her studies, really, I think, they were affected, and they didn't have the clothes they needed. They didn't really have the necessities that were very important, of course, as young children. So when they actually, she also became very truant in going to school. She was either not going to school or she was excessive in terms of tardiness. So that was impacting her grades as well. And so I thought that story was just really important to share. We brought her in into the circle and addressed a lot of those issues. We were able to get her a tutor, get her involved in some school activities, and, really help the family in that case. And it was just, to me, I think about that to this day, and how, she also needed glasses. We worked with the local Lions Club to get her glasses because she wasn't able to, her eyesight, she wasn't able to see the board at school. And so it was just so comprehensive. We were able to address those needs and those concerns comprehensively and really impact their lives. And it was, to me, it was something that really has impacted me then and impacted me now. Obviously, I wanted to share that story in Sally's book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Pavelka. What I'm hearing in particular in your story, when we think about that aspect of restorative justice, is that, like you said, cluing into needs that maybe we're not even really thinking about, but like the child needing glasses and how that may be impacting her behavior in school and thus how she shows up in school. So really, how can we be as comprehensive and work across different lines to work with others to provide resources for those restorative justice processes. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Dawn, to you, your story, again, a very sort of different situation. Why did you choose to include your story, and what do you think it exemplifies about restorative justice practice and process?
Well, I chose the most serious, difficult, and yet rewarding case of my entire career. It was a restorative circle based on a juvenile manslaughter charge. Because I'm involved statewide, I'm connected to quite a few judges throughout the state. And I had a judge give me a call and say, hey, listen, I need you to respond immediately. I've got the DA in my office. I'd like the dispositional hearing to be handled restoratively for this young man. And the DA really doesn't know what restorative justice is. So can you break it down to him in about 5 minutes? And that was a challenge with a traditional district attorney. Excuse me. But they did forward the case. And It was held in Sierra County in Northern California, very far from where I'm at. So I worked with both sides, preparing them for the restorative circle over the phone, drove up there, spent the night up there. And that was very interesting. It's a very small town. The only hotel is in a bar where everybody's wearing cowboy hats except the old hippie. And I felt a little anxious. But nonetheless, I let the bartender know in a loud voice that I was there at the request of the Superior Court to handle a case. Found that to be a little protective. The next day, we held the 2 pre-circles with both sides. I worked with the family of the young man who was charged with vehicular manslaughter. And then I worked with the family who had lost their father and husband. What had happened was it's horse country up there. And the young man charged with the crime and his mother were going to a horse show, and they were taking a 4-horse trailer. They hit a piece of black ice. The trailer got unhitched from the car. They were able to control the car, but not the trailer. The trailer became airborne enough just to meet a trucker's cab as it was turning the corner. 3 horses and the driver perished in a horrible accident. So this was a 9-hour restorative circle. Prior to the pre-circle with the victim's family, the wife excused herself and ran out the exit door and vomited profusely. And she was fairly embarrassed. And I said, there's no reason to be embarrassed. I have no idea what kind of pain you're in. And we're going to cope with whatever's happening today to try and come to a resolution so everyone feels heard about what they've experienced, what they've lost, and how to repair the harm as much as possible. So it was really interesting. Couple of things that I learned is that the adversarial process in our traditional jurisprudence really impedes people taking accountability. The first thing a defense attorney tells you, regardless of your culpability and whatever, to plead innocent. That's a structural framework. And that immediately works against somebody being willing to be accountable. And the other thing I learned in this specific case is the court process, certain questions can be asked or not asked, certain evidence can be entered or not entered. Police reports can be inaccurate, and all of those complexities keep the full story from being told. And quite often, people want to have questions answered or contradictions cleared up. So I'll give you an example. The sister-in-law of the wife who lost her husband, her husband was a highway patrolman. And from reading the police report, he felt that another charge should be offered about leaving the scene of the crime, because that's the way the police report was written up. Lo and behold, what had happened is as soon as the accident occurred and the young man and the mother got out of the car, the mother ran up the road around the bend to warn traffic that slow down because there was an accident. The young man went to check on the driver and the horses. The scene was so horrific that he began to hyperventilate. It was very cold outside. There was a house adjacent to where the accident happened. the woman from the house invited the boy into the house, had him breathe into a bag so he didn't pass out. And it was interesting that when that information was offered up, no one challenged it. It just allowed people to connect the dots. So that person-to-person conversation, as opposed to the framework of the traditional jurisprudence framework, is a world of difference in adding humanity to the experience, adding information to the experience. Luckily, at the end of this proceeding, they came up with a restorative plan that was profound and led to forgiveness and hugs.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that powerful story, Dawn, sharing that. And yeah, just again, to reiterate sort of what you were pulling out, the ability of a restorative justice process to offer like more information, more contours that aren't often available in a traditional adversarial process. And to get questions that really only the people who are directly involved can answered. Yeah, I think that is a true power of RJ. Sally, I hope you can hear me now.
Yay!
Hey, wonderful. Thinking about Dawn and Dr. Pavelka's stories and just the sort of range of stories that are included in the book. As editor, how do you sort of imagine people using the book? Who is the book for? Is it, mostly for personal edification? Is it for teaching? Yeah, how do you imagine people using the book?
Well, when I first started thinking about it, I thought that it would be a wonderful source to include when a person is doing a training, that you would have these stories that you could share and help people to understand that here's a situation that we used it, here's another situation, and have a variety of ways that people can really understand how restorative justice works, rather than a lot of times people think of it, I think, as just, simple cases. And so I was really looking for that. But then also, as time went by, I realized that there were more and more people. If someone is wanting to start something and kind of start working with restorative justice in their school, this is a good book to share with the school board or the principal or the community, people in the community, to kind of help to understand that. And then, and since that time, people who are teaching it in school, one of the people that I've been working with is Dr. David Karp, and he's head of the let me think.
Center for Restorative Justice at the University of San Diego.
San Diego, yes, it's San Diego. And he said, this is going to be a reading for my students. This is an additional reading that I think it's important for my students to see. And more and more people have told me that they're using it since it's been printed for those kind of reasons. So funny story, when I first was thinking about it and I was looking for a publisher, and I was reading about how do you get a publisher to be interested in your book, all the advice said, don't ever say it's for everybody. You should say this is the particular people that they're for. But I keep learning now that it's really for everybody. People that are just, anybody who's dissatisfied with the current system we have, and they're trying to figure it all out, it's for them too.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I certainly, having read the book, I certainly see how it could have a range of different interests. People from a range of different interests could really be really interested in the book. But
if I could, do you mind if I interject real quickly? Yeah. So if we think about it, we've all been affected by crime or wrongdoing at one point in our lives. I mean, either directly or indirectly, through a family member, through a friend, et cetera. So, these stories are, I think, very, they really apply to all of that, right? So we can really see some of these stories in that are written in Sally's book, and really apply them, right? The only problem with stories, I remember even to this day, lawmakers and policymakers want to see the hardcore data and they want to see the outcomes, and in the stories we don't always see that, but the true impact is in those stories. So the true impact of restorative justice is not necessarily in the data. The data is there. We're getting the data, it's proving itself, but these stories, I think, are really the very essence of restorative justice.
Yes, and I was thinking about that too when Don was talking. Now, I missed a lot of what other people were saying because I couldn't hear people well. But one of the things I think is so important in Don's story is that if the driver had been punished for whatever that punishment would have been, and it could have been very severe, a lot of good things would not have happened. And Don, have you been able to talk about what the outcome was, how the mother and how they spoke to other people?
To outline the restorative plan, the deceased truck driver was somebody who went into juvenile halls and helped young people in juvenile halls learn how to write resumes and apply for jobs. He was an immigrant, and somebody had done that for him, and so he was passing that on as an adult. So one of the agreements is the father of the young man who drove the car had agreed that he would take on that task, visit juvenile halls 6 times a year for 5 years. The mother had agreed to take on the task of going to horse shows 6 times a year for 5 years and tell the story about the law for a 4-horse trailer is a Class B license. For a 2-horse trailer, it's a Class A license, which is the normal license people have. And that's a bit of a nuance, and that's what got this young man in the pickle he was in, is he didn't have the Class B, the mother did. And then the other thing I thought that was very powerful, the young man was about to enter a specialized school in rodeo business. Like I said, Northern California is horse country. And he waived that because he was in the middle of this case. And he actually tried to take his life twice. And the widower really reached out to him and said, listen, you don't get to do that. What I want you to do is go to college and thrive. That's what would be restorative for me. So that was part of the agreement, that healing. And that was the trigger that led to the hugs, tears, and complete resolution. And I was blessed to be in that environment, to see the level of humanity that we're capable of if we're given the opportunity to have systems that support that humanity.
And I think we can all agree that that would never have happened in a courtroom. You know?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you again for sharing that incredible perspective. I'm hearing like this book again can appeal to so many different people, but I think it really does shine as an advocacy tool and as a tool for training people who are really wanting to learn more about this work and how to get involved in this work. So thank you again for this contribution to our field. The sort of next question I want to ask, and then I'll be turning it to the audience. So audience, please be ready with your question. Again, is for our authors. And some of this you've shared already, but maybe just really stamp the learning for us. What is the key takeaway that you really want people to walk away with from your contribution to the book? And I think we'll keep that same order, Dr. Pavelka, and then Dawn.
Sure. Well, I think, in terms of my contribution, the application of restorative justice and the impact of restorative justice can be transformational. And I think there are so many stories, as we've seen in this book, but really, through the years that I've experienced, restorative justice is transformational. And I think this book and the stories within the book, certainly really speak to that. And it's something that, again, I've made restorative justice part of my life. It's my life's work. It was transformational then. It's still transformational to me. So it just is. It's pretty incredible. It's unlike anything I've really ever experienced in my life. And again, it speaks to really the fidelity of the model, the fidelity of restorative justice, and its application, and the fact that you can really apply it all the way throughout your lifetime, through the justice system, through, like I said earlier, prevention, intervention, through diversion, the court system, through aftercare, and just through kind of community dialogue as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I certainly think there are plenty of people on the call who would agree with you about the transformational power of this work. How about you, Dawn?
Well, I focus on the healing power of restorative practices. Our flagship program is meant to keep young people out of the juvenile justice system. And what I've learned in my career is that trauma drives dysfunction. And we've added schools to our program to divert suspensions. And then about 5 years ago, I convinced a couple of superintendents to let us address young people with high trauma in elementary and middle school, with the idea that the more we healed that trauma, the less likely they would end up in the school to prison pipeline. So disrupting intergenerational trauma, I think restorative practices has a strong capacity to do that. One of the cruelest things I've seen is in elementary school, kids with high trauma exhibit behaviors that the adults recognize, but don't do anything much about. That same young person goes to middle school, they're quickly rebranded defiant, disruptive, non-compliant, and delinquent. And that's when identity formation is happening. And if the adults around you are labeling you that way, you internalize that label. So I end up with a lot of kids who didn't need to be in the system if they would have gotten the attention for their trauma early in life.
Yeah, thank you. Again,
can I add to you just a little bit? When we talk about the kids in school, I remember at a training that I was having that a kindergarten teacher said to me, I understand what you're saying, but you have to understand that what these kids are like, and there's nothing we can do about it. I have this kindergartner, and his speech is so foul-mouthed. He is rude to everyone in the class. He's rude to me. Every other word seems like it's the F word. It just keeps getting worse and worse. And there's no way that, he just talks terrible all the time. So I've kept him from recess. You can't have him stay after school. He's a kindergartner. I've had him sit in the corner. I've done everything that I'm allowed to do. And then I started just sending him to the principal's office. And I just don't see how there's anything else I can do about that. And can you help? And so another person who was in the training with me actually said to her, I'm wondering if you happen to have a child in your kindergarten class who spoke another language. Maybe he was just couldn't speak English. What would you do about that? And she said, well, I'd have to get an interpreter. I'd have to work with him so he could understand English. And the other teacher said, well, he is speaking in his first language. And that's one of the things we have to understand, is that this is his first language. And somehow we need to help children understand that that might be the way things are at home, but when you're out in the public and you're in the school, this is how things are. And use that same thing that we always talk about with restorative justice is when you were thinking about going to school, how did you hope everybody treated you? And we use that a lot. And I don't know if either of them have already mentioned that or not, but, to have the kids in the classroom talk about how they hoped everybody treated them when they were here, and then start talking about, well, do you always do that? And what can we do to help have that happen? And instead of punishing somebody for poor behavior, we build their competencies, and we help them to understand that this is how we do things in our classroom, and how much better it is when people talk this way rather than that way.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful example, that notion of speaking in one's first language, how we can sort of meet each other where we are and understand that's the work of living together, of being in community, of knowing that we come from different walks of life, we speak different languages, we comport ourselves differently, whatever the case may be. And sometimes there are behaviors that have to shift in order for us to live well together. But that's on both sides, right? It is not just one person needing to change. It is also, how do we grow in our capacity to be more accepting of other ways of being, knowing, thinking. So I think that's a really powerful example in this life of this kindergartner that you just shared. Yeah. And something I was thinking about as you were sharing, Dawn, I think actually really dovetails well with the question that we have in the chat. It says, as you use the word transformational, is there any consideration of moving to calling restorative justice transformational justice? Because a part of what transformational justice recognizes is that there are structural inequities. Restoration can keep the system in place. Transformation can allow accountability with looking at broader change that will create a wider ripple effect of supporting human rights. And that made me think about what you were saying in terms of addressing intergenerational trauma, a lot of which is rooted in structural harm. And so there is a field of thought and practice called transformative justice, and there's restorative justice. And I like to think about these two things as being different, but working well together. Yeah, so I have some thoughts there, but curious if others have anything they'd like to add to that question.
Well, I think restorative justice is a tool for the transitional justice framework. And our program is called Youth Transforming Justice. So we're right out there with a mission to change the justice system. We know it's broken. We know we can do better. And we just have to model that for the authorities so they can see the outcomes and choose the positive outcome rather than the negative outcome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, restorative justice is absolutely part or used as a tool for transformational justice. And, it's kind of that path to get to transformation, right? So, but I think, one thing that you wouldn't think that justice itself would be political, but it is. And so this whole thing, I think about just over the last 30 years and what, we experienced in terms of restorative justice being part of justice reform is just, we've, taken 10 steps forward, 12 steps backward in some cases. Some states have been, kind of more open and engaging to restorative justice than others. And so, as Kay Prentice said to me one time, we have to go where the energy takes us. We have to go where the energy is. And so with that, we just keep moving forward. And I think one day, we'll get there. We've come so far in the last 30 years plus in the United States on this restorative justice journey, but we have so far to go. And I think part of that path is getting to transformational justice and having kind of this entire evolution occur. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that through this process we will get there.
Yeah, I think I have often thought of these two, transformative justice and restorative justice, as working well together. The way I've thought of it is like transformative justice offers a lens, and that lens is much more about like structural and systemic inequities. And restorative justice offers, as you all have said, some tools, some practices, some processes for chipping away at those structural inequities at the interpersonal level, especially. But yeah, I think transformative justice keeps our orientation to thinking about harm as much larger than just what happens between individuals, to thinking about our deeper histories and our deeper structures. So in my opinion, thinking about these things as like separate, but very much working hand in hand together has always been important for me. But I know that there are many like schools of thought on that. So thank you.
Well, and there are so many components, right? There's so many dimensions, and I'm glad I appreciate your nod to Dr. Zare and the lens of we have the transformative lens, and then we have the restorative lens. But and obviously, then we have the lens of the community and the victim survivor and the wrongdoer, right? So we have all these kind of competing dynamics, and working together in that healing process and moving towards restoration and transformation, I think, is so important now. But then again, we have to think of in the lens of the victim survivor lens. And I know when I first was working with victims and survivors with the Balance of Restorative Justice Project, Ann Seymour, who's one of my dearest friends, was one of our consultants. And, that the victim survivor advocates were totally against restorative justice. They said, you can't completely repair or even think you're going to repair a victim or a survivor. But we can work towards that to the greatest extent possible, right? So with that, there are just, again, so many dynamics that we, in trying to address that and moving forward, we'll get there. We just have to keep moving forward and keep progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think transformative justice keeps us oriented to know that like that work of repair does go beyond just meeting one person's material needs that result as an instance of harm. It's much broader than just those instances. Thank you.
Absolutely.
As we're waiting for more questions to fill the chat, I did want to come back to that earlier question that I had, sort of inspired by something you were saying, Dawn, but you as well, Dr. Pavelka, of like, in your experience, what has it taken to sort of shepherd people through a shift in mindset to be more, at least open to the understanding or the idea of restorative justice in your context. And so maybe we can start with you, Dawn, but then Dr. Pavelka and Sally, if you have some experience there too.
Okay. If people are familiar with the youth court world, for a long time, it was a easy program to start, very low overhead, a lot of volunteers, but who it focused on was young people learning to play law and order. So one of the things I did is really shifted to focus on the client, the young person who was the object of the youth court's attention. And one thing is to work with people and learn to work with people who you have disagreements with. If we're only working with people we agree with, we don't grow. So when I first started this project, I was told that what we were doing in Marin was a Marin thing and not replicable throughout the state. One of the first things we changed was some of the nomenclature. Well, we stopped using the term sentencing a young person, and we adopted the term restorative plan. And then all of a sudden, all of the youth courts thought, God, that does sound a lot better than a sentence. So that's the first thing they adopted on their own from our menu, was hijacking our term, which I was glad to share. We were no longer sentencing young people. We were engaging in a restorative plan. Now, it took them a while to include the young person who's the object of the youth court proceeding to be involved in creating the restorative plan. That was another thing we see as a trauma-informed approach. So over the years, we've been introducing incrementally restorative practices and trauma-informed practices into the youth court framework. And we've been able to do that pretty successfully. And we're working with courts who pick up some of it. Some of them are skeptical about it, but they haven't thrown me out of the house. In fact, I'm leading this year's summit, and the young people, we have a youth advisory board who is gung-ho on the restorative trauma-informed framework. And my local program really invests in youth agency, and we're hoping to leverage that investment in youth agency on a statewide level in the California Association of Youth Courts Summit this June.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That point that you make about just shifting language, how much our thinking is even controlled and confined to the language that we use, and just by even making that relatively small shift in using different language can help us to think a little bit bigger. Dr. Pavelka, Sally, any ideas?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's interesting, Don, because gosh, when I was still at Barge, we did a focus group on applying restorative justice principles and practices to the youth court model. And that publication from that focus group is probably out on the web still. I know I looked it up about a year ago. I used it as a reference for a publication, but yeah, I mean, the application of kind of the traditional youth court, the application of restorative justice into the youth court model can really do wonders just by tweaking certain words, or tweaking, not lashing out at the wrongdoer or the defendant, if you would, and just changing some of that language and changing the approach, I think, is so important. And so with that said, I think that's so important, I think, in how we approach things, and how the book that Sally has edited and included us in is so important, because I think that's really the basis of all this, right? It's the basis of where we are in restorative justice and where we're going, and really just trying to affect and impact reform efforts at so many different levels. I mean, in the schools and in the justice system, and in the correctional and juvenile systems, and really in the community. I mean, look at the application, how incredible now we see what's going on in the world. And if we're able to kind of invoke this change at a whole nother level, and maybe in, a transformative, transformational level, we're on our way to peace. We really have to find something different than these, punitive, very, kind of war-torn approaches, because it's tearing us apart. It's tearing this world apart. It's tearing our communities apart. And we really, I think, ultimately need to, instill peace and justice and a better way.
Absolutely.
In Illinois, we have done conferencing in the and I can't talk. We've changed the courts. Okay, I forgot a word. Sorry. The youth courts, we've turned them into conferencing. And so we've just used the conferencing that we had learned from the International Institute of Restorative Practices and set that up, and have done that in Illinois schools, in several of them. But there are also youth courts that are just still youth courts, So.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing your perspectives on that question. It does change or take a lot to sort of expand other people's minds, and understanding that we don't do this work alone, that it does, like you said, Dawn, it takes working with people who don't necessarily agree with us, at least on the outset. So where do we find those points of connection and agreement? And to your point, Dr. Pavelka, I think most of us do want to live in a world that feels more peaceful, that is more connected. And I think restorative justice offers one way at getting to that connection. We have some fabulous questions in the chat, starting with this one. When using RJ with youth, what are your current thoughts on the ages that should be involved in what's considered youth? Do you believe states are working on expanding those ages, those age ranges? Yeah. So any thoughts?
Well, there's a new study out of Cambridge on when our brain smilation completes, and that's what's called hooking up the frontal lobe. It's now 32 years old.
Wow.
And that was an exhaustive study between 9-year-olds to 90-year-olds in magnetic imaging machines. So pretty reliable outcomes. And I wonder, if we made the age of adulthood 33, how many men would join the military? This might be a peace program right around the corner.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do wonder, think about how difficult, we were just talking about how difficult it may be to get some folks on board with restorative justice. I think we have like a real difficulty thinking or expanding that notion of like grace, opportunities for transformation to older people, to adults. So what if we really did embrace an understanding of ourselves as, younger, much later than we think we are. Again, thinking about the sort of childhood trauma that we all carry into our adulthood that often goes never addressed. So yeah, expanding to 32, that's something.
Well, but to the question, I think schools have been using, especially like preschools, kindergarten, first grade, they've been using circles for years. And, but it's obviously a circle is a restorative practice. And so, we see those, I don't know that you can apply, and I alluded to this earlier, you can apply these restorative practices at really every part of the continuum, right? So in terms of prevention, intervention in the schools, in preschool, kindergarten, having these circles and having, these are teachable moments where these children are learning, to share, to have a talking piece, and you have to share your time, listen to one another, be respectful of one another. Those are very basic, right? Basic values that we're instilling on these kids. And, I can't emphasize that enough. That's so important. And they're never too young to learn those values and learn how to respect one another and share and speak their truth and so forth. It's just, to me, that the tools and the learning experience is just so invaluable.
Yeah, something I would share about like this notion of expanding the definition of youth. I think about, I was a teacher, but even when I was in college, like with other people my same age, it sort of struck me how just a few short months before we get to college, before we turn 18, we're in high school with a set of rules, and then we are sort of thrust into adulthood, often not being really prepared for that level of responsibility. So I think that, like, again, how catching this idea of expanding the notion of youth, how catching that idea will be. But I do think, at least in restorative justice spaces where maybe we have a little bit more discretion in who we involve in our programs, if we can even expand that, like access to our programs to folks that maybe wouldn't be considered youth in the traditional criminal legal system, but that we could up to 22, 23, 24, whatever the case may be, how many more people we could be capturing away from that punitive process.
An interesting lens to look through is the history of adolescence. My great-grandfather worked in the mines at 10. He was considered an adult. Whose interest did that serve? The fact that you can be drafted into the military at 18, whose interest does that serve?
Yeah.
We have science that tells us when our brain is fully developed. We ignore that for someone else's advantage of redefining science.
That is so true. So true.
Thank you for those perspectives. Okay, another great question. And this is something I think about a lot when I am training or teaching, is this time piece. So we have in chat, thank you all for sharing your impactful experiences with restorative justice. Dawn, I'm thinking about the 9-hour process you described. Most often in my work, I'm training administrators, educators, school counselors, and all adults in school settings in restorative practices, broadly speaking, and particularly in restorative responses to conflict, harm, misbehavior, etc. Time is always a top concern. Coming from schools, I know, time is a real bugbear. So the pressures to move towards a response within a predetermined time tends to result in a misperception that restorative practices don't work because they're not given the time they need, right? Can you share ideas for how the stories in the book may support policy and practice changes to support schools and districts in resourcing their RP processes adequately to allow for the time for an authentic restorative response? So how can you think about your stories that you share, your experiences that you have, other stories in the book? How can they help those who are really trying to push this change in schools or other places where time is really a top concern, to understand that these processes really just, they need time? Yeah.
It's, once again, it's looking at our culture's priorities. The production priority, both in business and in schools. It's all about production, not connection. And about 16% of public school students suffer from toxic trauma. That means they've been betrayed by the person who is supposed to love them the most. What that results in is them not trusting any adults. And that leaves them unmoored as far as development. That's the little kid in kindergarten with the foul mouth that nobody knows what to deal with. The problem is that young person can't say, my attachment model as an infant was horrible, and I don't trust anybody here. And where do they end up? They end up at the foot of the chief of the tribe, the principal, over and over and over again. They're looking for some adult to untie that knot that has got them so lonely, isolated, angry, sad, needing support.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing there is that sort of betrayal, that lack of trust, that too takes time.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to just mention, because I studied under Dr. Mark Umbright. He's a colleague, he's a friend, and Mark has mediated victim offender mediation, victim offender conferencing for his entire life, and he talked about also mediating murderers and murder and the survivors of families of murder. This and Dawn's work, all of our work in restorative justice, it's not an easy fix. Obviously, we're really getting to these deeply rooted harms, but there are, I'm sure Dawn did a lot of prep leading into his conference. And so that took 9 hours, but I'm sure that took a heck of a lot more than 9 hours prep time on the other end, right? So in order to create lasting change, it takes time, and especially as we're dealing with these deeply rooted harms, and if we want this to work, it's going to take time. We can't take away from that, and we need to take probably as much time as we need. Obviously, it can't be exhaustive, but really think about it with patience and with the ultimate goal of healing the harm and restoring the harm. We need to take that time in order for it to be impactful and to be restorative and to be transformational.
Yeah, I'd like to see traumatized kids be a protected class.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you look at ACEs now, right? The ACEs that they were around, but they weren't a thing back in the 90s, 80s, and earlier. But just about everyone in this world had been associated with some type of trauma. Just like I said earlier, with in terms of being affected by crime, we probably have at least one or more indicator of trauma in our life, right? And if we truly went back to address those, think of we would be much better people. We'd have a much better world to live in.
Yeah, kids with toxic trauma, they cannot be educated until they're healed.
Mm-hmm.
But they're being evaluated on their academic performance, regardless of their healing.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And also be in true relationship, right? They can't necessarily be in an authentic relationship with another person unless they're truly healed.
Right, and that's what fills our prisons.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this question of time, when I was working in schools and training folks in schools as well, I said something often that maybe I shouldn't have said. People didn't really like to hear it, but that trying to do like restorative justice practices in schools is often like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. And what we end up doing very often is shaving down the square peg of restorative practices to fit in the existing structure, instead of thinking about how do we change things about this structure, reprioritize this structure, reprioritize within the structure in order to prioritize what we actually think is important, which is the connection, the healing, the transformation that restorative justice can lead to when it is given enough time. So to that question, there's no easy answers, but I think really thinking about it as shifting culture, not just about like how do we pull in practices, but it's going to take shifting the culture to even change how we think about time and what is important. Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sally.
I was going to say that shifting culture is so important because sometimes when we were first training, we were training in schools to use conferencing with kids that had misbehaved. And I saw one school that was, the kid acts up and the teacher says, we got to have a circle. So everybody get in the back of the room and sit around the circle where we have our reading class usually. And we're going to talk about this. So everybody in the class, after a while, they're going, gee, here we go again, and so the culture hadn't been changed, but there was this sort of punishment that the whole class had to take part in, which was going to be another one of those circle things when you can't talk unless you got the talking piece. And how different that is from being able to actually change the culture, and to start out in the beginning of the school year, getting to know each other and to understanding how we want it to be in our classroom, and to understand that, I always like to ask kids, have you ever felt like you really wanted to say something to somebody and nobody was paying any attention to you? Well, it doesn't matter if these kids are kindergarten or if they're middle-aged, the hand goes up, everybody has at some time felt like that. And then to explain to them that we've got this idea that when you have the talking piece, everybody is listening to you. And they really get that, and it's and that kind of helps to change that culture of the classroom, to talk about how this is how we're going to be, because we're going to be like we want other people to treat us. We're going to treat them that way, you know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead. I just,
Oh no, I'm with you. I totally. And again, it's not something that you can just change, but I mean, to actually invoke true change and changing the culture, it takes time, and you can't put that that square peg in that round hole. No matter what level, if it's in the schools, if it's in the justice system, if it's in the institution itself, even in the community, we have to apply it, and with fidelity. With the fidelity of the model, not just little, here, community service. Okay, well, we're doing community service, so it's restorative justice. Well, no, that's not true. It's a component of it, but it's not, it's more than that, right? We have to adhere to the principles, to involve the wrongdoer, involve the victim, the survivor, to involve the community and the stakeholders. And it's a very comprehensive approach. And that's what makes it so different than, traditional approaches.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, and it's a big one, but I think it's an important one as RJ advocates. And so this person says, I ask as a bit of a cynic, what do you feel about when people's motivation what do you feel about people's motivation when engagement can feel dishonest, right? And so she says, I think of a case where a group of white police officers killed an Indigenous person and asked to go through the Indigenous system of restorative justice rather than the criminal justice system. So this is often, I think, what comes up to those of us who advocate for restorative justice. Isn't restorative justice like just a softer approach? Like, why wouldn't someone choose to go through a restorative justice process if it gets them out of jail or if it gets them out of prison? Is there anything that you can share from your perspectives to sort of speak to that idea?
Well, I think that the biggest hypocrisy is schools that throw the term restorative justice or trauma-informed care into their manuals and don't do anything close to making that a priority in any serious sense. I think the example given is really curious. I think those police officers may not trust the traditional legal system because they're very familiar with its shortcomings and thought they might be able to get more of a humane response from the Indigenous community itself, regardless of the murder being an Indigenous person. But the biggest hypocrisy I find is institutions. Like in California, you have what's called a WASC score. And if you've got restorative justice, you get 5 more points. And I've been pulled into schools to train right before their WASC evaluation so they can pick up the 5 points. Mm-hmm. We have to remember that our educational system is structured to create the disparities that we're all struggling with. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not broken, it's intentional.
And a lot of places do not really appreciate at all the length of time and energy that training should be. I remember being asked one time they wanted 2 or 3 of us to go to one school and have on a Saturday restorative justice training for everybody in the school. So there were going to be 4 or 5 of us training, and we would have one day, and they wanted us to train in circles and also conferencing and that just doesn't happen. That's just the introduction of telling you what it is. And they've often said that the money problem with doing that is that you either have to pay a stipend to the teachers in the summertime to come to the training, or you have to pay for substitutes during the school year. And that's the big cost thing that kind of troubles schools. And like you say, that they don't understand what we're really talking about. They just think it's a quick fix.
Yeah. If I can offer to this notion of like the motivation of those who would go into a restorative justice process as a person who caused harm. In my opinion, my sort of thinking about this has been, well, two things. One, if in whatever system you're working in, the criminal legal system or a school system, if the option is restorative justice or traditional punishment, that's sort of a false choice. And so thinking about, as we're setting up restorative justice processes, how do we think about that? How do we think about like not offering a false choice of it's either restorative justice or traditional punishment? And so that could be a webinar unto itself. But also, we may not be sure of a person's motivation in entering into a process. But what we can be sure of, right, if we as facilitators of a process are really intentional, is what might be offered to those who have experienced a harm in this process. So I think that to me holds so much more importance than the motivation of people who are entering into a process. When I know that folks who are entering as harmed parties are still getting their questions answered, and that's what matters to them, are still getting a show of accountability, and that's what matters to them, when these things might not have ever happened for them in a traditional criminal legal process. And so while a person may hope that a restorative justice process is an easy fix to a prison sentence, oftentimes I think what people find is it's not easy work. It is hard, harrowing work, emotional work. But even that, I'm not necessarily interested in making things difficult on people. I'm interested in what actually provides healing for those who have been involved in all sides of an instance of harm. So not an easy answer, but that's sort of how I think through that skepticism I may have of someone's motivation. Any thoughts there? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining. We have just a little bit of time, so I want to drop a link in the chat to pick up the book. And I want to give folks an opportunity to share, how can people get connected to your work, and how can they support in other ways? And I'll start with you, Sally, then Dr. Pavelka, then Dawn. How can folks get connected with you and support your work?
Well, I can give you my email address. Would that be something that you're thinking about? That we have a network of people that we can refer other people to,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Folks, if you want to drop your email in the chat, and are there other ways, do you have other events coming up to promote the book that you'd like to talk about?
Well, actually, I'm going to be at the National Association of Criminal and Restorative Justice that's going to be in New Orleans in July. And I'm really looking forward to that, to meeting people. I went to the one that was 2 years ago, and I picked up several new stories there when I was there. And also in May, I'm going to be at a meeting of Methodist women who are going to be together in Indianapolis, and they've asked me to come and bring my books with them and to talk more about that. So I think that this group of Methodist women, they meet once every 4 years, and so I'm really looking forward to that. It'll be an interesting group. But there's other people too. Colleges and universities have, Roosevelt University had me come up and speak to one of their lecture series that they have. So those things are, they're out there.
Beautiful.
Thanks for having us. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to Sally. Sally, thanks for your leadership, and you've been a great friend and colleague all these years. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, Dr. Pavelka dropped her website and her email there in the chat. Dawn, how about you?
Yeah, I dropped our webpage in my email, and I really feel blessed to have the Zier Center recognize my work. I've been a big fan of Howard's work since the inception.
Well, thank you
And
so much.
Sally, thanks for
Yes.
the opportunity
Thanks,
for
Sally.
a
Yeah.
dyslexic kid to actually publish something.
It's been my pleasure. It has just been a wonderful time doing it. It's just like the best thing that could have ever happened to somebody to get to do this. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for sharing your
Thank
work
you.
and again for this contribution to the field. I have a few last announcements. Thank you again to our guests for being here. We have one more webinar this week on Friday with Caitlin Morneau and Cheryl Wilson, who will be sharing about their work, restorative justice and community, reclaiming connection and responsibility for our neighbors. So please join us for that. I'll drop a link to join, to register if you have not already. That promises to be another really great conversation. And as always, if you're familiar with these webinars, just a pitch to go and support the work of the Zier Institute, bringing this work to you. And if you have some ideas that you want to share with the broader restorative justice community, please reach out to the Zier Institute, and I would be more than happy to chat with you with how we can do that. And so I'm wishing you so much wellness. Take care of yourselves. Yes, this can be viewed at a later time. They upload automatically to the live section of the Zier Institute YouTube channel, and I can drop a link for that as well. So if you want to review this or our past webinars, feel free to go there. So sending you all away with so much wellness. Thank you so much. Nourish yourselves, and if you can, nourish someone else. Be well.